Welcome to the Catalyst Sale Podcast with Mike and Mike. Sales is a thinking process. This podcast will help you learn about what works in sales, how to hone your skills, and increase your success. I'm your host, Jody Mayberry, and of course, I'm here with Mike Simmons, the co-founder of Catalyst Sale. How are you doing, Mike?
Jody, I am doing great. How are you?
Well, I'm here with you, so you know I'm doing outstanding. I have a question for you, though, Mike. We've talked about coaching on this show before, and it's always a popular topic. But I've got a question for you because I know you've coached people, I've coached people, but are you a certified coach?
I am not a certified coach. I may be certifiable in some other areas, and I know I'm trying to cut down on the jokes, but I couldn't resist. But I am not a certified coach.
Okay, well, that leads right into who our guest is. It's somebody that has been on the show before, so you know she's wonderful if she's coming back. But tell us who our guest is.
So Christie Walters is joining us today, and she's another one of those second-time participants. So really excited to have Christie on. And Christie is a certified coach. Who better to have on the podcast than Christie to come and share both her experience pre-certification and post-certification and get her insight on coaching. So Christie, thanks for being here.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me.
Christie, before we get very deep into this discussion about coaching, you might be new to some people. Even though you've been on the show, it's been a little while. Can you just give us a brief introduction?
Well, sure. No problem. So I was on the show before with my partner, Jeff Bajorek, who is a co-host on the Why and the Buy podcast with me. And we talk all things sales and leadership. And in my profession, I am a coach and for small businesses and business professionals. And I do quite a bit of speaking and training as well.
Well, Christie, thanks again for being able to join us. I know it's been a couple of months since we've had you on. How are things going?
Things are going really well. I appreciate you bringing me back. And I love the fact that we are talking about coaching.
So let's kick things off. What is coaching?
That's such a loaded term. You know, we talked in the intro about the fact that many of us have done something that we've called coaching before. And even I, when I first started my business, called myself a sales coach. And I really didn't have a sense of what coaching really was. And it's a challenge in the coaching community, I think, in general, because most people think of coaches as a subject matter expert that comes in and teaches you to do what they have done effectively. And some coaches can do that, but true coaching is more about helping you uncover the brilliance within yourself and the leader within yourself than me coming in with a lot of subject matter expert knowledge to impart upon you. So I always like the phrase that, you know, you're not a sage on the stage as you might be as a speaker or a trainer. You're really a guide on the side. You may have walked this path before, but it really doesn't even matter if you've walked this path if you can help someone uncover what that path is for themselves.
So how does that differ from mentoring?
It differs a couple of ways. So in mentoring, it's a much more equal relationship. You know, it's someone that has actually walked the path previous. Maybe it's someone that is a little bit further in their career, but is on the same trajectory that you are. And the mentoring relationship is two-sided, which means the mentor sometimes gets as much out of the relationship as the mentee does. A coach is a little bit different. It is the relationship that I have with my clients is all about my clients. And it's all about trying to help them uncover the best path for themselves, regardless of how I might have approached that in the past, but really to give them an opportunity to carve that path out for themselves.
It's a really interesting distinction when you start talking about this piece around, guide on the side, and then start talking about this piece around this two-way relationship. And then you get into this really acute focus on when you're coaching, it's about the client. It's about the person who is being coached. There's not as much give and take throughout that process. What prompted you to go down the path of gaining a certification? So you didn't have it when you started as a sales coach.
Right.
You went down the path of certification. What drove that?
It's interesting. I was having this conversation this morning, in fact, with someone that I had started my business. I come from 25 years of field experience running sales and marketing teams. And I started my business thinking, well, there are plenty of small companies out there that could afford to pay for part of my time, but maybe wouldn't have been able to hire me full time. And if I could work with a handful of those, that would be a really powerful engagement for me. And it worked really well. And I did that for about 18 months. And I started to realize that because I was approaching my business from a subject matter expert perspective, I was worried what happens when someone comes to me with a selling process I'm not familiar with, or if I work with a client that's in the network marketing space, for example, how would I handle that? And how would I be able to work with them knowing that I had not walked that path before? And so I just kind of set out to understand what other coaches do in those circumstances so that I could be prepared to handle it. And I was even looking at investing in some assessments, getting certified in certain assessments for additional training modules and a couple of other things that I could offer my client. And one of my good friends, and really, I would consider him a mentor. I'm not sure if he would consider himself a mentor for me, but he had just gone through a certification program and we had a very similar background. And he said, I think you really should take a look at this program. It could be transformative for you. And so I took the first class and it was definitely different. It was not at all what I expected. And so I was really curious and I kept attending classes and then invested in the formal certification because you have to go through 6 months of classes before you ever apply for certification. And then there's another 6 months of supervision and additional instruction that you go through once you're in the program itself. So I just really didn't want to be hemmed in because my experience was in a certain field.
Sure. And so what's one main takeaway from going through the course and going through the certification that if you had that knowledge before, you would have done things differently with your original clients?
Oh, that's a great question. Something I would have done differently. I was really lucky in the first couple of clients I had for my business because they were dream clients and they really opened up their business to me without any reservations. So I became kind of a part of that team right off the bat. And so I don't know if I would do anything differently. It's subtle. I think what I have learned is more about how I manage myself in a coaching arrangement. Okay. I came in very much as like a teacher for my first client. My first client stayed with me for 18 months. And I still have some offshoot clients from that engagement as well. But I approached it more like a teacher than a coach. And I think today I really look at design. We do what we call in coaching a designed alliance when we start any relationship. And that's just a real kind of laying the groundwork to say, this is what you can expect from this engagement. This is what I'm going to do. This is the role that I will play. And what is it that you need from me in order to get the most out of this? I probably would have had a better designed alliance in the very beginning with my clients. And I would have done a lot more discovery before I stepped into that teaching role. The tough thing about being a coach in the corporate space is that it's rarely ever pure. You're rarely just a coach or just a consultant or just a mentor. Oftentimes it's a blend of the three. And I have to be really cognizant of what role is it that I'm stepping into today to make sure that when it's time for me to step back and allow the client to really discover what the right path is, that I'm not stopping that process simply because I have something to offer. Because the reality is, as humans, if I come to you and say, Mike, you know what? I have 25 years worth of experience in running sales and marketing teams. I think you should do X. You might have a different perspective on that. But if you're not really sure what to do next, you're not going to do as much discovery if I come up to you with an answer as you would as if I help you discover the right answer for you.
And I think that's one of the really important pieces about coaching, or the thing that has piqued my interest around coaching, is this idea of how can you help others think through their process? How can you engage them in a thoughtful process? This isn't about providing answers. It is about, like you said, the guide on the side. It's providing some guidance and getting them pointed in the right direction and help keeping them on a path. Is that a fair assessment?
It is. And it's about getting the right questions in front of them too. Too often, and I've even noticed this as well in going through the certification process, one of the things you do is you record sessions, and you have several supervisors that will actually listen to those recordings with you and give you pointers on things that could have gone better, things that went really well. And it's really a painful process. I cannot tell you how challenging it's hard to listen sometimes when you first start a podcast, but in the coaching world, listening to yourself coach someone is quite challenging. One of the supervisor feedback sessions I had opened my eyes to the fact that in some cases, especially if I was coaching someone who was fairly young in their sales career, I was feeling as though they were treating me as a boss, even though I was focusing on asking a lot of questions in the process. When I expressed that to my supervisor, she said, yeah, of course they are, because you treat them like an employee. You're asking them a lot of data gathering questions. Well, how many calls did you make today? What types of calls were those? So these are a lot of data gathering questions, not questions that are really going to make them question what is driving a certain behavior. If they're getting distracted in the prospecting process, what's causing that distraction? What's at the root of that? You're really diving in and getting curious about the things that are at the foundation for this individual, as opposed to just focusing on the results that you expect. That's the difference between what a coach does and what a boss does. And I couldn't see that until someone pointed that out. I'm like, wow, that's really true. So the questions that you ask are as powerful as anything else. And certainly I've found more powerful than me walking in the door with an answer.
Yep. So can a boss be a coach?
They can be. And we hear this term player coach a lot. The challenge is in the definition. Everyone defines coach differently. The best coaches are they're likely not going to be inside the organization, because you're going to be framed to some degree with the experience in the organization, at the water cooler, the politics involved. There are a lot of extenuating circumstances when a coach is inside the organization or is in a leadership role to the individual they're coaching. The value of a third party coming in and coaching, or even having someone hire a coach on their own, which I highly recommend if your organization for some reason doesn't provide that, is that this individual has no preconceived notions about what role you play in the organization, how good you are at X, Y, and Z. And they believe that you're capable of finding the answer. And one of the tenets of coaching is that we believe that all clients are naturally creative, resourceful, and whole, which means you may not be the right individual for this particular role that you're sitting in, but you are capable of finding that answer for yourself. And you're capable of identifying the right things that are going to impact your career long term. A third-party coach is going to be able to allow you that level of freedom, I guess you would say, to express exactly what's happening. If you're struggling with making prospecting calls, for example, what really is happening for you at that particular moment in time, you might not want to share that with your boss. It just might feel too vulnerable.
Right. Yep. What are some of the questions we can ask ourselves to identify and the thing that comes to mind for me is identify our own personal blind spots, but what are some questions that we can ask ourselves to determine if coaching is something that we would benefit from?
So one of the questions that I ask a lot of my clients in the discovery phase is, where are you giving your power away? Where are you playing small? And for some of us, that is a blind spot. but we're all playing small somewhere. And it could be that you use humor to deflect. It could be that when a certain personality comes in the room, you shrink back. It could be that you don't have the confidence in a particular skill set. And so that forces you to deflect in another way and play small. I think asking yourself, where do I play small in my life? And really getting honest about that answer is huge. I think the other thing that I love is looking at visualization exercises. One of the best visualization exercises I've done, especially as it relates to small business, is writing a letter to yourself as a 6-year-old. So if you were a 6-year-old and you remember back to the things that you dreamed about at that time in your life, and you wrote a letter to your business and you said, thank you for helping me realize this dream, or whatever that looks like. Maybe it's writing a letter to the career that you've built for yourself. These are the things that I dreamed of as a child. And these are the things that I've seen actually come to fruition. So that's one part of the exercise. The other part of the exercise is to write a letter to your business or your profession from your 90-year-old self. So thank you very much for allowing me to do these things in my life. Thank you for allowing me to realize this calling in my life, and see what comes up for you. Too often we are finishing someone else's race. We're trying to fit a mold that someone else put in our head of what success looks like. And I was a prime example of that. I am a people pleaser to the nth degree. I love hearing, you did a good job, Christie. That was awesome. And there's nothing wrong with that. That serves us to a certain point, but it can also hurt us in a lot of ways as well if we are constantly living our life or building our career based on someone else's definition of what success looks like. So if you haven't really done some introspection and thought about what that means for you, those are really good exercises to go through to figure out if there's something that's missing. And a great way to identify some blind spots. Coaches will help you pull them out really fast. But I love the 6-year-old and 90-year-old letter exercise. It was actually inspired by LeBron James's Oscar-winning film, Dear Basketball. If you've not seen it, I would highly recommend you take a look at it. It's quite interesting, especially if you're a basketball fan.
I have not seen it. So one of the questions, so this 6-year-old versus 90-year-old self, what's the intention behind that? Can you go into a little bit more detail on why those two perspectives are important?
Yes. So one is about dreaming, what did you dream for? And how far away are you from that dream? And not to say that at your 6-year-old self, you knew exactly what you were going to dream for in your life at 46, but are you connected at all with, as a 6-year-old, you weren't concerned about money. You weren't concerned about the house or the car or what, people thought of you at the club. I mean, these were not concerns that entered our lives. So it's a pure dream perspective. And the things that you loved at that time, does that show up in your life today? It's really just kind of getting a sense of, are you being true to who you need to be? Are you connected to that leader that's within you? That's how I look at it. And I loved this exercise from the standpoint of looking at my business. What has my business afforded me from the 6-year-old or the 90-year-old perspective in order? And what I'm building today, is it going to ultimately get me to the place I want to be in my life? And the reality is at 90 years old, you're not talking necessarily about money. You may be talking about the experiences that money brought you or the comfort that money brought you. But a lot of times you're talking about the connections and the why. And this with the podcast, and our podcast is called The Why and the Buy for a reason. That connection to the why that drives you has to be deeper than just a surface thing. It has to be something more.
And you should finish that out. So when you start talking about the why and the buy, why did you decide to name the podcast that? And what's your theme relative to the podcast?
Oh, sure. So obviously Jeff and I are both focused in the sales profession and sales and leadership. is that's really our audience and sales and leadership professionals. And when we were talking about what we wanted to create, we just wanted a space where he and I could brainstorm about our businesses, what we were growing, what did we want to do, and where we could invite others in to that conversation. And for me, servant leadership has always been a core part of the business that I wanted to build. And I wanted to teach people that sales from an act of service versus an act of domination or manipulation really had some tremendous, there just was so much to gain for everyone when you approach sales from an act of service, which is where the why and the buy, one, we couldn't believe that it was actually available as a trademark, but we thought the why and the buy just summed it all up for us. It was all about getting connected to the why and then approaching the buy from an act of service and not an act of manipulation or domination.
Awesome. When you talk about this 6-year-old self versus 90-year-old self, and you brought the story together around intention, one of the things that comes to mind is a buzzword I know you're fond of, authenticity.
Where did you hear that I was fond of that?
I heard it on a recent morning
podcast.
Yeah.
Actually, that I was recording, by the way, from a closet in our rental in Gulf Shores.
Awesome.
So, which was great. I was like, the baby was crying, and I was like trying to muffle the sound in the clothes in the closet. It was quite funny. I should have had video for that, for sure.
Well, we'll include a link to that episode. So yeah. Why is authenticity important to you?
For a couple of reasons, and maybe not necessarily for the reason that people might think. I mean, authenticity, certainly from the standpoint of being real and just kind of being who you are, but also from the standpoint of you're not perfect. So I'm a recovering perfectionist, and Jeff will tell you part of the reason we started the podcast was he and I were having these great conversations about our businesses and the things that we wanted to accomplish. And I was stuck. I wasn't writing. I was just so afraid of not having something perfect out there. And even when we started the podcast, we were scripting everything because that's just the way I roll. And finally being able to let that go and just be authentically me, the good, the bad, and the ugly, right? So sometimes I mess up words, and sometimes I lose a thought, and, every now and then I ramble, and you know what? Who cares? It's real. It's authentic. And just being able to accept that, not from the standpoint of if I want to shirk responsibility or I want to be lazy about it, but accept it from the standpoint of like, I just said it that way. I wonder why I did that. Being curious about my own journey and not feeling like I needed to play it up for someone else simply because the podcast is out there for others to listen to.
So how does authenticity impact the way you coach?
So authenticity it comes into play for me in coaching and every part of it, really. It's being able to sit down in the designed alliance and talk with a client. And that's that beginning agreement that we make about how I'm going to show up and how you're going to show up and what's going to be expected, and being able to tell them, say, hey, you know what? Sometimes I'm going to tell you something that's coming up for me based on our conversation, and it's going to be completely off. And I want to give you permission to say, nope, you didn't get that, or that doesn't resonate with me. Those are that permission and that ability to say, hey, you know what? I'm not sitting here as some guru who is just going to impart all this fabulous knowledge that I have gained over my many years on this earth. I'm here just like you are. I'm just able to see your blind spots in a way that you can't. And I can help you figure that out. And I'm going to be very honest with you. I'm going to be open. Sometimes I'll be blunt, and sometimes it'll be offensive. And I'm giving you permission to come back and tell me that it doesn't resonate with you. So that's really authentic from a coach's perspective. And I love it. It really opens up a lot of, it just releases me in a way that's hard to describe.
Well, and when you start talking about this designed alignment, the thing that
alliance.
Sorry, say that again.
Designed alliance.
Designed alliance, excuse me.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
When you talk about designed alliance, the thing that gets me excited about it is the is the ability to set clear expectations. Like so many people that we work with, and I'm sure you work with, are so focused on things happening fast. Everybody wants these things to happen fast. And the reality is you can't rush a number of these items. You can't rush this progression. There's going to be, and there are a number of diagrams that are out there where some people think the path to success is a straight line, and really there's all this other mess of stuff that happens behind it.
Right.
You draw the correlation to the overnight success was really a success making of over 15 to 20 years. I mean, there are so many correlations. So how does this help you set expectations with your clients and then also determine whether or not you're continuing to meet or diverging from those expectations?
Oh, that's a really good question. So, the designed alliance, a lot, it throws people in the very beginning because they're not used to starting off a relationship that way.
Yep.
A lot of times it's a little chit chat and we're just kind of gradually getting to know each other. And there is some of that happens, but in coaching, we tend to dive in really fast. And so there's not enough time for you to necessarily warm up in the process. You really want for clients to get the maximum value. I want you to see something happening for you in that first session. And sometimes it doesn't happen in the session. It may happen afterwards. And as a coach, I have to be okay with that as well. But it helps me really get past the warm-up phase, if you think about it. And oftentimes, I make a joke that I didn't become a coach to be a better salesperson, but I am certainly a better salesperson because I became a coach. And part of that is because of the power of powerful questions, and also because of the power of that designed alliance. I used to call it, the question I used to ask clients in the sales process is, what does success look like for you? And sometimes that does still come up as a powerful question, but the designed alliance really helps the client right off the bat give me that answer. And then it opens us up to having some much deeper conversations as a result.
And how often do you revisit that?
Yeah, it depends on the relationship. So sometimes I find I like to come back about 6 sessions in. For most of my clients, that's around 3 months. That is far enough down the path that we've discovered a few things already, and maybe the client has discovered a different way of sharing what it is they need from me as a coach. And I want to make sure that if we are going down a certain path, that they haven't inadvertently changed that path. So usually around 3 months, I'll come back and ask. Definitely by the 6-month period of time, I will have done a second designed alliance. And it's not a huge change, but it's a little bit of a shift in the focus and maybe the direction that we're going.
Have you ever had to fire someone you're coaching?
I've been fired. Does that count? So honestly, I'm joke, but that's true. It wasn't in firing in the traditional sense, but we really were not connecting. And I don't want to take your money or your company's money. Right. If you're not engaged with this, and this particular individual was doing a lot of traveling, had a ton of things that were kind of taking their attention away. And I don't think they were fully invested in the process in the beginning. And that's been the only time and it was a mutual parting of ways. And, who knows, maybe they'll come back and find a time when they are open to the discussions and maybe are in a different place in their life and their career.
Yep. Yeah. So let's get back to the certification piece and this whole certification process and those things that have changed, this pre-certification, post-certification. What are some of the major changes that we've not discussed so far that you can think of that have benefited your practice as a result of going through the certification process?
I think we've talked about it. We've touched on it. I haven't talked about it in depth, but really the listening, the levels of listening and true self-management in the coach-client relationship has probably been the biggest change that I noticed. I think when I first started my business, I was so concerned about making sure people felt that their money was being well spent. that I might have focused a little too much on showing you what I knew. And now I really step back from that and focus more on what the client needs from me. And I have to do a better job with the company, if the company is hiring me, to make sure that you feel like your money is being well spent before we ever get into the coaching part of it. So that's probably been one big change for me since I started the business. And I do find that especially with a client who is doing something that I have done before, the need to bite my tongue or sit on my hands and not interject while they're discovering something about this process is still there. And definitely in the beginning, I would have jumped in and inserted my ideas in the process. And now I sit back and usually it's about a 75-25 rule that I have that, if we're spending an hour together, I want 45 minutes of that time to be focused on your ideas and what you want to accomplish. And then if it's appropriate, then I can take the last 25% to say, okay, I want to put on a consulting hat here, or I want to put on a mentoring hat here and share with you something that comes up for me from my past experience. So those are probably two of the biggest takeaways that I've had in the certification process. Nothing beats having to record yourself coaching someone and then listening to it with another critical eye and discussing what you could have done differently. Then that learning experience is powerful.
Yeah, and I think that applies in multiple contexts. I mean, we continue to talk about this idea of asking questions and then listening with intention, listening for a response rather than thinking about what's that next question that you're going to ask. And if you go through this process and you record those conversations, you can quickly identify patterns that you create yourself where you're waiting to ask that next question instead of actually listening with intention.
You bet. You nailed it.
So, Christie, when you think of like organizations, so we've got a number of people who listen to the podcast or listeners out there who are in the learning function inside organizations. Mm-hmm. Let's say that they are thinking about building a coaching program inside their organization, or maybe they're thinking about being a coach themselves. Do you have any guidance or recommendations on how to take the first couple of steps in determining whether or not coaching might be right inside their organization?
Well, I think first is engage with a coach. Probably the best way to discover if it's the right thing for you is to make sure that you've had some experience with a coach in the past. If you're a leader in an organization, I will tell you in today's market, a lot of organizational leaders are employing coaches either on their own or their company is requiring them to work with one on a regular basis. Nothing beats having a sounding board. It's very lonely to run even a small business. It may feel like a family, but if you're the big boss, that's a lonely position to be in. And so to have someone that can be a sounding board and accountability partner for you that doesn't have a paycheck or something else that's tied to your performance in the organization is really powerful. It's kind of like building an army behind you. And so I think that's the first step I would say is engage with a coach if you're not already engaged with a coach. And if you are engaged with a coach, ask them, what's the impact that this might have in a team environment? If I were to employ a coach or deploy a coaching program across my organization, what might be a good way to start this? It's not an inexpensive endeavor. And so figuring out a way that you can have the biggest bang for your buck is going to be huge. And it may be a combination of one-to-one coaching, team coaching, and training. I mean, I'm a big believer that there are three key elements to a successful organization. And one is that you have to have the right culture and the right people to fit that culture so that people know exactly what it is you're trying to go out and accomplish. You've got to have the right cultivation or training associated with that culture in place so that people know when they come into the organization what the steps are to be successful. And then you have to have ongoing coaching in order to make sure that people don't drift outside of the training and foundation that you've already laid for them. So if you can afford to put that throughout your entire organization, that's wonderful. If you cannot, working with a coach or working with a team of coaches to develop something that actually does work within both your budget and your needs is probably the best way to go. It can be a lot of money spent if you don't plan it out ahead of time.
Well, and that accountability partner can really help minimize the number of false starts that you have inside your organization.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, huge. Yeah, in a big way. Accountability. And it's amazing too. I had a coach for years before I started this business, and I really appreciated having someone I could complain about my boss. I could complain about the things that were really just weighing me down on a day-to-day basis. And in the process of, it wasn't just venting, of course. I mean, there was venting and there were exercises and, perspective shifts and the like, but just the process of venting alone actually lifted that weight for me. And it wasn't something I was dumping on my spouse or my friends. It was really something that that person was there to listen to me and, talk about the challenges I was having at work and help me figure out how to work through it. So that's a huge element that I think people miss sometimes. That sometimes you just need somebody who's there to listen to you.
Well, Christie, thank you very much for joining us today. This is a great conversation. It's really good to hear the perspective of someone who's gone through a certification process as it relates to coaching. I mean, my coaching experience is limited to coaching some kids in flag football and soccer, and then coaching members of the sales teams that I've been a part of, and coaching colleagues, and then now coaching various components inside our various people inside our client base. So it's really cool to hear your perspective. If anybody in the audience wants to learn more about what you're doing or keep track of where your focus is, how can they find you?
Absolutely. So you can find me at christiewalters.com, on LinkedIn at Christie Walters, and I'm always available for a phone conversation too. I'll do what a few people have done on our podcast and then give out my phone number. How about that? So you can call me at 770-687-6678. Again, that's 770-687-6678. I'm happy to have a conversation. I love to talk about sales, leadership, coaching, and certainly connect with me on the social networks. And I'm sure Jody will put all that in the show notes.
Yeah, Christie, this has been so nice to have you on the show. And I've gone through a coaching mastery program through Dan Miller, but this goes even deeper to look at certification and the benefits of working with a coach, which is a topic that's come up, well, not every episode, but it seems to come up fairly often lately. So this is good.
Excellent. Well, I thank you guys so much for opening this up and for having me on and giving me an opportunity to talk about it from my perspective. And don't downplay the important roles that you are playing as coaches in your families and in your organizations, because I think there is a place for that role as well. And in the coaching profession, and certainly with certified coaches, it's just from a different perspective and a different level. So I just appreciate the opportunity to come on and talk about it.
Well, that's a great reminder and a great place to wrap up. Thank you, Christie. And if you have enjoyed this episode and past episodes of Catalyst Sale, we would love it if you would give us a rating and a review in iTunes or Stitcher, wherever you listen to the show. Every time we get a rating or a review, it actually helps make the show get noticed by other people, because iTunes, Apple, they realize if people are rating it, reviewing it, it must be good, and they show it to more people. So if you enjoy the show, you can help us out that way. You can also find past episodes of the show on catalystsale.com. That's also where you'll find out what we're up to. So thank you so much, Mike Simmons, and thank you for listening to the Catalyst Sale Podcast.